Warcraft and Guild Wars. Like, there's some very different ways to communicate. I think, first of all, like 14 is very good at being transparent and reiterative all the time. They were very reiterative here.
Oh yeah.
And so I hope like I don't come across as negative.
I feel like we hear from Yoshi P
all the time.
All the time. About as much as we hear from Asmongold. So it's like literally like I feel like Yoshi P's in my feed every day. So Yoshi P and Asmongold talking about something.
They probably talk about 14 publicly the same amount. Yeah, 100 to 200, 100 to 200 times a year to hundreds of thousands of people. Yes. Yeah. Which is great. Most of which know them by a nickname. So I think like it's similar there. But New World is kind of coming at it from like a different direction. So they communicate. Are they doing live letters?
Well, I mean, they're not live, but they're pre-recorded. And they go through like, and they actually end up usually being anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. And they bring on different kind of sections of like, okay, we're going to talk about this, you know, kind of this upcoming stuff, or this, you know, like these various focus. They bring on the people who are kind of directly knowledgeable. They do that. Then they have like dev blog posts. They have news posts. They also then, you know, like, and then they have the PTR, which essentially the PTR, both positive and negative aspect, because you kind of can go and see everything that's coming that's to be excited about. So there's not really any kind of surprises by the time the update does happen, but there is a big community that doesn't even touch the PTR. But you do see number dips whenever there is an exciting PTR update, because you can go see people stop playing the retail and shift over into PTR, you know, so it's like, oh, okay. Yeah. But
how far in front of a patch are they doing a PTR?
Usually about 3 weeks. So PTR comes out, and then about 3 weeks of testing and fixes, etc. So usually PTR sees 2 to 3 kind of updates before that PTR then is scheduled to roll into the into live environment.
Do you wish that 14 had a PTR now that you're spending more time with the PTR?
No. You'd have to like 14 is so heavily story driven in terms of the MSQ. You would basically have to make a separate client that is not MSQ, that people aren't testing MSQ. And just to be able to test the content, I think it then ruins the content. I think it kind of like overall hurts the community, and it would force content creators, especially guide makers like ourselves, into the BTR and outside of essentially what the community itself becomes. If that makes sense. There could be things that are caught and fixed. Yoshi P's apologized to us at the community like 4 or 5 or maybe 6 times now with 6.1. There have been some issues. You know, so like there's things that the counter argument of like, well, this issue could have been caught and fixed beforehand, which I agree with. However, I think overall, I don't think PTRs generally lead to to the long-term health of a community. And I would rather, especially in case of Amazon, that they have enough quality testers, quality control to go ahead and actually not have to rely on the community. But in the case of where they are with the bugs and things like that, I think right now it's the best option they've got, because you have people who actively want to play and they'll go and find it. Long term, I think that maybe that becomes the thing of the past, or that becomes a big feature that they want to get feedback on. You know, kind of like Halo does this, Destiny does this with like, hey, we've got this thing we really want to kind of test out, and before we like commit massive amounts of resources to it, let's show you what we're thinking, as opposed to like tell you what we're thinking. So there is strengths and weaknesses in both.
I think Guild Wars handles it the best. If they want to add a new mode like Crystalline Conflict and they want to test it, they'll say it'll be available in this 1 week, and everybody can play it live on your characters. It'll be implemented in game, and then we're going to take it out of game. We're going to take it back in-house, and we're going to take your feedback, and we're going to implement it, and then it's going to roll in for real. Mm-hmm. So none of the ranking will stay. There'll be no cosmetics tied to it, but you're welcome to play it that week, and it's live in the game, and so it's real, and so you expose it to the real player base. I don't have to download another client. I don't have to get on some whitelist. I don't have to do any of this other crap that's sometimes associated with PTRs. And they're only testing the one feature. And so like saying, hey, we got 10 features coming up in the next patch. One of them is really pretty groundbreaking for us. It's not iterative on previous things. So we'd like to kind of test that in advance. And it doesn't commit them to huge timelines. I think showing boss models, I think showing lore is a mistake. And so kind of thinking of it like the Final Fantasy XIV media tour. Yeah. Where it's like, okay, we're changing this substantially, so we're going to give you one of the dungeons, but not everything. Like we don't need to do it.
I think from a workload perspective, Yoshi P about this post that we just covered in the previous video legitimately talks about data miners pulling in the data beforehand and running the risk of then it's like, yeah, they only expose so much publicly, but behind the scenes, Like otherwise you're talking about some ridiculous branches. Like you're talking about like, okay, like who, like devs have talked about like, oh, you want a demo? Like what resource do we pull off to find what slice to provide to people, you know, in that regards? And so like it ends up, there's a cost to it. And I think generally speaking, that's why we saw like an age where demos just really didn't become a thing, and why we see the prevalence of things like Game Pass, because it's like I don't think there was a justifiable cost that it says, oh, this demo actually leads to enough sales to justify the cost of finding the, you know, to make the demo. We should just focus on making the game.
That's fair. I just wondered because WoW has a big PTR community, and so but you have never been so invested in WoW that you've like hit level cap and then like, oh, I'm gonna go download a PTR and play not the game.
Right.
So you've never been there, and so I didn't know now that you are invested in an MMO that has this.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time on the PTR. Like
that doesn't contribute to your character.
It doesn't contribute to my character. I don't spend an excessive amount, you know, in that regards. It's not like I'm doing a community night where we're all on the PTR tonight. We're testing this thing out. But I am using it in terms of the content creation, because I feel like, especially as a content creator, if I don't, and this is just because I'm passionate about the game, I think New World's amazing. I honestly just think that it's got a lot of potential, and it's really exciting to see where the game is and where it can go, and where I feel like the devs are taking it, because they're communicating and then they're delivering. So it's like, it's twofold. Hey, we're going to work on this. Oh, here you go. Oh, game got better. That was great. We're excited. Oh, they're working on something else that sounds exciting. Let's do that too. But then like not being on the PTR because it exists as a content creator would be shooting myself in the foot. Imagine being 3 weeks late to the party and then forming an opinion, when I can form an opinion and I can actually teach people who aren't interested in investing in the PTR. And then, you know, so it's like there is that aspect, and that's not.
Yeah, just refusing to watch the live letters would be the same thing in 14.
Exactly.
Refusing to watch the live letters.
Like, I'm not going to watch it.
Outside of like lore creators that can be late, they can be late to a patch. The majority of content creators not being aware of patch notes and live letters at all. Like, oh yeah, I just didn't even check it.
Yeah.
Did you watch a summary? No.
No. Do you know what's changed? And then seeing them complain about like a change. What happened? It's like, oh guys, that shifted to this button. You got a mug now as a ninja. Like, you know, that you want a mug. Yeah. Mug is how you party debuff,
I think
you know?
In general, most content creators are going to get to know their game. So I just kind of wondered how they were communicating. WoW has been kind of shifting, rightfully so. They've said, hey, like, we're evaluating a lot of things internally, which I think is, you know, while that doesn't mean that everything is going to get better, I think shifting things internally is something that many of us wanted. So the fact that it feels so different, I like just on its own merit, just because I think different is where they need to be, even if different is worse along the way to getting better. Anything worth doing well is worth doing poorly on the path to doing well. That's like a Zig Ziglar quote or something like that. And so, like, I get it. Guild Wars, I think, just feels like they don't have enough practice. They do a great job showing that they're passionate about their community and trying to care, but these events don't feel like they have the polish, because coming as from somebody who's been covering 14 for a long time, Yoshipi's good at this. Like, he's actively built up a skill set. You know, maybe his first live letters were a little clumsy, but the deeper we've gotten, you know, as we've gotten better at covering them, it gets harder, and they've gotten better at doing them.
Yeah.
And so,
and that just comes with practice.
That just comes with practice.
He started just with written letters, right? Like the live letter wasn't like, and this is what we're doing now. It started with him writing letters, and his official letters were written down and then translated. And then they're like, well, let's actually kind of show it off live. And that actually generates excitement and hype. And so like I'm sure they kind of stumbled into it the same way. Like when I look at New World versus Final Fantasy 14, because I am filming this for like a video, we'll post it anyway. You know, like, because I ended up being like, I was like, this is a great conversation. We're going to run with
Not
it.
Not
a podcast, but work to game. It's your mini podcast, et cetera, et cetera. When you look at that, it's like, it feels like the New World folks are like legitimately following Yoshi P's playbook. And that is what I've talked about, is that content, consistency, and communication. And so we've seen them do doing dev posts, doing blog posts. And then they started in, I think, December, doing video, not live discussion kind of in that regards, but it filmed and essentially kind of like, okay. And then they're taking in community questions from the forums and from other content creators. And they have these sectioned out, and they've been releasing those every month now. And guess what? the feedback is overwhelmingly positive because they're able to take within a month and actually talk about the key issues. And they talk about the key issues as opposed to like, oh, we don't want to talk about that. That was embarrassing. You know, like, oh no, you know, so, you know, and that's, I think, important that Yoshi P in the live aspect of it, you know, is able to address like the concerns that the community is raising. And you've seen them in past, especially in the year of, you know, the pandemic, you know, the years here, where they've actually read the live chat in their like, you know, presentations and keynotes, because he's, you know, he's not getting that audible feedback and being able to kind of respond and pivot. So yeah, he's very well practiced. And yes, I think if you go back and look at the earlier live letters, I think they were great. But if you looked at it, I think he's definitely like, they've definitely come into that kind of maturity of like, this is what we're presenting, you know, and then the community also kind of knows what to expect, right? Like you and I know when it's like part 1, this, part 2, special guest. It's like, yeah, that's more of an interview. You're going to get some interesting insight, but the detail of the game in and of itself is all loaded in part 1. So you can almost kind of summarize it as 2 videos as opposed to like one massive thing, you know?
Yeah. In general, I think that's what I'm most excited about this kind of year of MMOs is that I think I was in a Preach stream the other day and he was saying like, can you imagine Ian coming out and saying, hey, we have a new battleground and I'm going to play it with the devs for you right now.
Right.
And his chat was like, poggers, like that'd be crazy. But like he was saying it in the context of like, but Yoshi P did that. Mm-hmm. He's like, hey, we got a new mode. I'm going to tell you how it works. And if you don't mind, I'm going to play a match for you right now. And he just did it. He just,
and we shoutcasted that because that was just so much fun and it was awesome to see. And I don't have an official announcement, but there's something that I might be predicting in the next couple of weeks that I'll be excited to share everybody.
I just think that it's really exciting to see games learning from and evolving on each other's formats because as much as that was like a joke and meme on that, WoW came out and gave an interview. I think the big interview that really kind of was the nail in the coffin was when Ian gave an interview. It feels like early Shadowlands maybe to Preach, and the feedback around the interview was really bad. But it wasn't that Preach's interview was unfair. It was that Ian's responses felt out of touch in the context of that interview, and so. Internally, the rumors got spread that internally they decided, you know what, we're just not going to do pre-recorded, pre-scripted interviews. We're just going to handle our own because we feel like we got punched unfairly. And I don't think they did. And to now come out and he's given an interview to Asmongold, which we thought would never happen.
Right.
And he gave an interview to Hazel and he did a roundtable interview with Taliesin and like, and it goes on and on and on and on.
But an interview in this case also is what you and I've talked about multiple times. It's also the opportunity to let Yoshi P hear us, as opposed to just getting and farming the answers that are essentially marketing and pre-scripting, right? And so like in that regards, like why did that Ian and Preach video just feel so bad? Like Ian had clearly like, this is the guidelines in which that I am, you know, going to speak. And so it's, you can hear feedback, but you can't even respond to it in real time. So it doesn't feel good. Yoshi P, we've sat down and talked with him and he'll sit down and he'll think about what you've asked. You know, and so we often kind of say like one of our biggest frustrations, especially in those kind of environments, is that like stop rushing up and saying, can I have this item as a glamour thing? That's a perfect forum post. That's a perfect addendum after the interview itself. But try to think and phrase your wording in a way to kind of help also provide like you're providing feedback in the form of a question. And that's our bias. And that's how we essentially kind of approach questions and answers.
Why are we still adding undieable items to the game? Like, can you explain that to me? And I'm not saying that we need to have all items moving forward dieable, but like that opens up a real conversation about the resources and it helps me either A, understand why it's not changing, or B, helps them understand why it should change. Doesn't matter really which outcome it is in each question, but that's a better thing than can this phone come in red? Like that's a yes or no, and then the conversation's over and like we didn't move the game forward in any meaningful way. And so I think seeing WoW pivot to more community-driven interactions more so than ever, in my opinion, I think has been really good. Seeing New World kind of succeed here has been good. Seeing Guild Wars coming into its own and seeming to come off that high and say, let's do it again. Let's announce another expansion. I think this all only makes 14 better. 14, in my opinion, has been the best at communicating with their players about what is coming, what it will look like, when it will be here, what is after that, in a way that doesn't spoil the game experience, so you still have surprises and delights on day one of the patch and all throughout the patch. They deliver constant content, but you never feel out of the loop. That communication that you kind of called for in your list there. And so like 14 has been the best in my opinion at that.
City on a
Not
Hill,
necessarily
absolutely.
the best content in all cases. So it's depending on the type of content you look for, that type of content might be better represented by another game. But in their ability to communicate what it is they offer and how they offer it in a way that does not take away from it, but does not leave you in the dark speculating and feeling unheard, they have been pioneering that. But they have pioneered it to a point that it often feels like, to me, the live letters have been the same format for multiple expansions in a row now. And so it's possible that the live letters as they sit now are not the best communication could be. It's possible they are the best that communication is. And so it's exciting to see other games maybe challenging that format to see if maybe there's ways we can improve it further.
Yeah, it's how, I mean, when you take it outside of like New World, Final Fantasy, WoW, etc., and just look at, Nintendo with their Nintendo Directs, and how that essentially kind of helps shift the game, especially then Sony kind of following suit. Xbox still kind of doing their own thing, but also it starts to feel, well, it feels more like that show and less in that regards, where you have these moments that are just like, oh, that was a rough announcement, because clearly that person is just not staged, in that that comfortable in a live environment. But yeah, and they're not a natural Todd Howard selling you guys 1,000 copies of the thing you already own. Man, that guy's a salesman. But but when it comes down to it, like, that's
at least a showman.
Oh yeah. Oh, Yoshi P's the showman. Like, and this isn't a dig on him. Yoshi P knows how to give a show, and so having followed him as long as we have, and having covered this game for as long as we have, like, you can clearly understand, like, okay, like, and sometimes that showmanship makes mistakes, right? Like when they talked about Vieira and then delayed Hrothgar, leading everybody to thinking we're going to get male Vieira at that time, and then feeling disappointed, and then essentially jumping to some like wild conclusions where I looked at the community. I was like, I'm just going to take the day off. I don't need, I'm like, I can't even process, what people are thinking right this way. And then essentially, like, okay, like, yeah, like the Yoshi P wants to make the game we want to make. Sometimes that showmanship can essentially kind of like get people to speculate in a direction that wasn't essentially the correct one. And then those expectations, just like with PTRs and like the problem with 14 and data mining, bringing this back to the video we posted yesterday, filming it the same day. It's like, I was like, well, what's the time on this one? Where you see that kind of like them people data mining and getting the information and disseminating it, and people are excited about that, so it does draw attention. And, and then essentially, if you're not talking about it, like, are you setting yourself, as a content creator, like up for success or failure? Like, it's a real sticky situation.
Well, I think that's what I'm excited about for this year, is as MMOs all come into a state of, Guild Wars seems to be the healthiest it's been in a long time. Final Fantasy seems to be the healthiest it's been in a long time. World of Warcraft seems to be headed to be the healthiest it's been in a long time. New World seems to be hitting a sustainable level of health, which we didn't know if it would hit. So you say a long time ago, New World didn't exist. So we like the question, like a lot of people tried it, and we knew that number was going to fall. The question was, what does it look like in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? And like the only way you can answer that is be from the future. It's just time, and like we're all going through time. As long as some days feel, we're all going through our days one at a time. And so seeing New World hit what looks like a sustainable level of health, and the list goes on. Like, that's just the MMOs that you and I are most impacted by. But like MMOs in general as a genre, when you start to expand that to include Lost Ark and ESO and Old Republic, and like it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And there's new MMOs on the horizon that like you and I you spend some time talking about, like Blue Protocol and all that. Like there's a ton of them out there.
Tower of Fantasy is getting ready to gear up later this year. The model,
we haven't even talked about the MMO that's going to solve all of humanity. So like it's
Ashes of Creation, baby.
Ashes
2025.
I'm just, there's been drought in some countries lately. They got to get Ashes of Creation out the door so we can fix that. I'm really excited to see everything. They're also going to have an incredibly smooth launch. So none of these 6.1.
They're not going to have any problems. Like,
no problems.
No problems at launch.
I mean, I would have been okay with problems, but they actually came out and said, no. Don't be
no.
okay with it. We're not going to have problems.
I'm rooting for them though. Like, honestly, like,
do it.
Like go for it, man. Like, I will be there. Like, I'll be there on day one for sure.
How dumb would other devs feel to just like, so I should have just not had problems. Why didn't I just not have problems?
Why didn't I do that?
Oh, that's way better. That's way better. I saw some tweets about League of Legends saying like, I think League of Legends is getting to a point where the property I'm least excited about that they have on their IP is the core game League of Legends.
What?
Like they got all this other stuff. They got an MMO coming. Riot's got a I did just a card game.
Riot, and if they stick with their like line in the sand, then I think it's going to be a real interesting test, because I just think people don't like MMOs. Like I think a lot of MMO players really don't like MMOs. They like SMOs, like, all right, single multiplayer online, where it's like, I'm just kind of doing my thing. And Riot's like, this is an MMO. You're going to play together, or you're going to go play another game. And it's like, all right, like, I think you'll see a lot of hype and excitement, and then you'll see a lot of drop, and then people will read that drop and they'll think like, oh, it's dead. And it's like, no, like the key aspect that you look at any successful MMO: content, consistency, communication. Like you can break it down to those 3 simple rules. Keep releasing updates, keep talking to the players, and don't F up.
don't stop. Yeah. Don't stop. Relentlessly release quality content on time that you said was coming.
Yeah.
And it can feel like in college, I was told the best way to succeed quickly in your career by this professor who had a lot of crazy stories to go with this. And it lined up with at my wife's graduation from her undergrad, Scott Pelley, the 60 Minutes guy, spoke, and he had a story that lined up with a similar thesis statement. Overpromise, then deliver. And that's it. Like tell somebody something astounding and then make it happen. And just keep doing that. Like you could run an MMO like that. Say something astounding within the realm of what you know is possible, and then deliver it. Final Fantasy is like, we're going to wrap up the finale, and then we're going to come out with a new saga. And we're like, no, you're not. No. Yeah, we are.
Yeah, we are.
And then they did. We're going to add PvP this expansion. We're like,
and we really started
and
it's great.
It's crushing it. It's crushing it. So overpromise then deliver. It's really exciting to see MMOs hitting a state where they are doing both those things. We're getting consistent content. We're getting lots of great communication. And there's been a lot of good times to be had. And even if it just means you're in each MMO seasonally, it's a great time to be an MMO player.
Well, guys, that was a fun just discussion and conversation. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share if you're new to the workforce. Find a clip, something that you stood out, and send it our way. Right now, you can clip on YouTube. However, we don't see them. So unless you send it to us, we won't know about it. Maybe one day YouTube will get its stuff together. We've got all kinds of features that are kind of like, oh, that's close. YouTube's, maybe next year. We'll see. Anyway, guys, thanks for being here. For Brian and Chris, this has been Work to Game. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully we'll see you in our next one. But until then,
take care.